Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Bamboo Garden Wellness Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Michelle Dexter, and my special guest today is Dr. Phyllis Mabbett. She is a registered nurse and a doctor of psychology, and she specializes in energy psychology and in somatic psychology. So, welcome, Dr. Mabbett.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you here.
Yes.
So today we're going to talk a lot about the intersection of somatic and integrative and energy psychology.
Mhm.
And everybody's heard of the book, or I should say most people have heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score, by
Right.
Dr. Bessel van der Kolk.
Mhm.
And in that book, obviously, he talks a lot about, the body symbolism and how symptoms, can manifest physically.
Mhm.
And to quote you, that not everybody knows how to read the scorecard.
Right. So what we thought we'd talk about today is a little bit how you can interpret the meaning of symptoms that you have, and then just give a couple of suggestions about things that you can do.
Yes.
Because very often, emotional pain takes the form of physical pain. And that's sometimes hard for people to really understand because it feels so physical. They want to rely on physical treatments. And it's not uncommon, I meet people from a pain practice where they've seen 10, 15 other providers that have really also focused on the physical aspect to the exclusion of the rest of the life
Right.
and the lifestyle.
Right.
And they don't get very far.
Right.
So what we're wanting to introduce today as we talk about this is how to bring those two worlds together. Because it's not an either or situation. We're not here to say if you have physical symptoms, they're emotionally caused, so go see your therapist. That's not the message.
Right.
It's when these things come together. Because as they really have emphasized for years, that chronic pain is physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Yeah.
It's not a singular dimension.
Right. And we have to look at all the pieces.
We have to look at all the dimensions. And that's where people don't realize how much benefit they can actually get by adding the lifestyle aspects of it. The other dimensions, they tend to get lost because we have such a dominant medical model.
Indeed. Yes.
So we're here to help people kind of recognize if they're caught up in that treadmill.
Yes.
And treadmill, that there's things that they can do to kind of help themselves
Right.
branch out a bit.
Right. So, what we are saying is that if you have seen a medical doctor or medical professionals and you're still having pain, that perhaps it's worth seeking out some professionals to help you with the emotional and psycho-spiritual side of things.
Exactly.
Yes.
And just we were talking about this, some of the examples of things that we've encountered. One of my personal favorites was I had my bachelor's degree in nursing and I was making a transition into the psychology field. And I had this very abstract professor who was very enamored of me at the time. And we were having these meetings, and then I would have, because you have to review your work. And of course, I'm sort of nail biting, and my feet would get cold.
Oh,
And so then I did some journal writing around that. I mean, it was like I had cold feet because every step that I took forward down this pathway took me out of the life that I currently had.
yeah.
And so, I didn't recognize that at a conscious level, but unconsciously, my being knew going down this path. And I mean, eventually, what happened with that pathway is I left my marriage, I left my profession, I left my country, so
That's a lot.
it takes time. I mean,
Yeah.
it didn't happen overnight. But the thing is, the importance of understanding that symptoms like that really have meaning.
Right.
And if I'd just gone to a regular doctor and been told I had peripheral neuropathy or something, who knows where it would have gone.
Right.
But anyway, so that's just my own little one example. But the people that I see in my practice, sometimes the symptoms are very literal. They may arise from an injury, like an abusive injury or something. They've been hit in a certain place and that part hurts. Sometimes they're very symbolic. I don't want to see, I don't want to hear. And that kind of information has been around since Freudian psychology, but somehow it got lost.
Right.
As medicine took over, the idea that things are more physical than they are mental, emotional, and spiritual kind of got lost. So the notion of conversion symptoms, is what they were called early on, has been in the psychological literature a long time, but has been pretty much put in the back room. And so we're kind of bringing it out
Absolutely.
this time,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's important to look at those things like you just mentioned, like, oh, I don't want to hear, so that might manifest in literal hearing loss.
It can.
Or I don't want to see, so manifesting in literal vision loss.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yes. And like you said, even in Freudian times, we understood this, that the body is very symbolic. So, for example, breasts represent nurturing. So,
Yes.
that can show up with all kinds of interesting symptoms, about I don't feel cared for in the world.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up because there's been such an epidemic of breast
Right.
cancer. And what does that have to say about the role of women in the culture at this
Right.
time? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of richness in delving into this.
Yes.
And I think that, if a person sets out on that journey, it gives them what it does is it allows you to shift your awareness from feeling I've been victimized by this crazy illness that nobody can fix to putting some curiosity into your own life. What does this mean about me, about who I am, and
Yes.
and really taking charge in that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So when a person comes to you and it's pretty clear to you that they've somaticized their issue, what does your protocol look like?
Well, um, I think one of the very important things, and I've taken this from the understandings that we currently have of trauma healing, I start with resources.
Mm,
I had a great example yesterday of a person with many resources that weren't recognized. And just as an example, this person has strong academic background, had been told by other therapists that she needed to stop intellectualizing.
mm,
Uh-huh. Well, my take on that is that's a great resource.
yes.
And it's allowed you to accomplish many things. And then we build on that. And we build on whatever values they've had, whatever goals and accomplishments and things like that. It's really very important to start with what's working, what's positive,
Right.
because then you get to stand in that place and look at what's hurting. In earlier times in psychology, we got very good at taking people to what was hurting. Dive right in, deep in, go for it, and the whole notion that the deeper you got into your trauma, pain, and history, the better the session.
Yeah.
Well, people left the office fragmented, dissociated, not knowing whether to turn left or right or how to get home.
Right. And often feeling worse and then not wanting to come back to therapy.
And not wanting to come back. Yeah. And I acknowledge that with the people I see and say, you might have had some mixed feelings about coming in today, because it could be a sensitive thing. But again, I really try to emphasize where's the strength? What are we standing on?
Yes.
So that as we look to what hurt, we're going to stand here and look there, not stand here and look up. So that's the first thing. And I think that's one of the real learnings that we've taken from the trauma psychology and the theory is that you've got to have a place to go in the
Yes.
body.
Yes.
And that's another piece that these things are in the body.
Yes.
So you need to feel these resources in your body. And you may feel you've accomplished, I mean, you may have external accomplishments, but feel like you're an imposter.
Oh, that's something that I hear from my colleagues so much, and I'm sure you do too,
Mhm.
that, it seems like that's a common theme, even among people who, would be considered very highly successful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it can be that part of disconnect for protection and to feel safe. So that's like in terms of how do we deal with this, that's a starting point. And then establishing safety
Yes.
within the body, within the life, within the living patterns. And so eating, sleeping, exercising, making sure that they feel comfortable where they live and all of that is part of an early part of the session as well, because that again is landing in a place where you can start here and look forward. So establishing the safety, and then from there you can start to delve into some of the painful things. And another teaching that I've integrated from the trauma work is the idea of the flow. So you touch into it and then you come back to the resource state and you touch into it and you come back so that you never want to feel overwhelmed by the pain of the past because then you dissociate again. So the whole notion is being able to touch into it at a level that you can now process it. Because at the time that whatever these events occurred, you couldn't.
Right.
You didn't have the resources, the maturity, you didn't have the landing platform. And so that's another piece of the approach is just to make sure that you learn how to go gently, not radically. And then after that, or as that happens, I mean, these aren't just one, two, three, but they are three major components. As that happens, then people's external life starts to change, and they're able to do things they couldn't do before. Like I had one that was essentially a surfer girl, who's now in a master's program.
Good for her.
Yeah, and they find the confidence really, and the self-worth, self-trust, sense of deservingness that allows them to move forward in life. So that's kind of in a nutshell part of the process of what happens. It takes time. It
Indeed.
doesn't happen in 3 sessions.
Right.
We'd like it to, it doesn't,
Right.
because it's your life
Indeed.
and it's how it unfolds. And another thing I notice is that when people have, the more supports that they have, the faster the recovery. And by supports, I mean they've got a good physical program, they may have a good nutritional program, they may have a good social network, good therapy, good self-care, all of those things come together.
Indeed.
So we don't look for the solution out of one thing because the problems didn't develop out of one thing.
Right.
So
Right. And as fast as energy psychology works in comparison to
Oh, yeah.
traditional work, yeah, it still does take time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have a lot of history stories, really, or accounts of things where problems can be resolved quickly. And I think that's one of the fascinating parts about energy psychology, is they do have a lot of examples of where people have been carrying something for a very long time. And then with the tools of energy psychology, it allows them to get really into the brain
Right.
where the change takes place.
Right.
And that change can take place quickly.
Absolutely. And that goes back to that whole, notion of, again, the body keeps the score. So if you can help the body to release the thing it's been holding on to,
Yeah.
that's where we can expect the changes to happen fast.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of the gifts really of that's coming through the energy psychology world of being able to impact the brain.
Yes.
And the understanding is that by the tapping of the various points, you're actually sending signals into the alarm centers of the brain and allowing things to relax. And then from that, things change.
Yes.
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 I had one person just the other day carrying pain from childhood for years. After the end of the session, she said, pain's not such a bad thing.
Oh,
It's like a shift of point of view.
right.
I used to think this was really the problem, but now that I see that that comes from here and I can do something about how I think about this, I'm good.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the sort of the breakthrough moments that you see with the energy psychology tools where people just switch.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yes. Yes. So would you like to share a case study of what you shared with the protocol about, the resources and the safety and so on?
Well, I hadn't thought of anything in particular. I'm touching on little examples. Let me just think who comes to mind. Okay. A student had a lot of skin conditions, like eczema and psoriasis, things like that, and was really in a very intense medical training program. And so this is getting in the way. The skin is itchy, painful, red, can't put things on, just really a lot. And in a program where it's alternative medicine. Okay. So she was able to let go of that judgment of mainstream medicine and take advantage of what it has to offer. So that she was able to take a little time out from the intense study. She dropped a course, basically rearranged things so that the stress load wasn't so high. Had to move, felt there was mole trigger where she was living, but chose to look at her personal social relationships a little bit differently, and did a lot of work with mental affirmation, some energy psychology, and all of those things put together. Several trips dealing with parents, dealing with home issues, and getting look at that. All of those things coming together in good condition at this point.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but it was one of those all coming together kinds of things. And she was in a program, in a situation where she had a lot of resources and was able to use them. And in part, the first attitude was, well, why this now? I can't deal with this. I'm too busy with my studies. I just can't be doing this now. And that energy of anger and victimization, she was able to turn that around and say, wow, I'm in a place where I've got all this help and there's all these things that people will help me. And wow, this is a great learning.
Absolutely. And I'm going to interject here, that bodies, are sentient. And
Yeah.
so bodies will tell us quite a lot through their symptoms. And what I've discovered in my 20 years of practice is that when bodies feel ignored, that the symptoms get worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can only imagine that if her skin felt ignored, that made her symptoms worse until she was able to change her attitude to, oh, my body and my skin does deserve my attention.
And it means something, and I need
Yes.
to make some adjustments.
Yes.
And typically adjustments are required.
Yes.
And that may be part that we resist, but the recovery isn't all just in the office talking to somebody and having, an enlightened moment.
Right.
People do make real changes in their lives.
Yes. Absolutely.
So maybe one of the things we can shift to is just a couple of examples of some energy.
Yes. Let's talk about some experiential exercises and things that people can actually do for themselves.
Well, one of the ones that's just a simple one is putting your fingers here on top of the lip and below. And by putting pressure and holding those points there, you're actually speaking to the central meridian and the governing vessel meridians. So that's a very powerful point, and it's easy to do when you're lying down.
Oh, yes.
Sleep.
Yes.
It's kind of, as I say this, it's kind of thinking about a baby and a soother.
Yeah.
They're kind of stimulating those points with that soother. But anyway, so that's one. And another one that I think is very good for brain integration is a hand on the forehead and hand at the back of the neck, the occipital area. And back here is the brain stem. That's your survival, life flight, survival stuff. Here, the frontal lobe, that's the executive functioning, higher thought, problem solving. When the stress level is high, this part of the brain kind of goes offline.
It does, yes. It's almost like the CEO. Your prefrontal cortex, leaves the building.
Absolutely. And so this is just a nice thing to do, and to couple this with envisioning the connection between these two parts of the brain stem and the higher functionings, and allowing that energy to flow back and forth. And that too gives people a sense of grounding, sense of connection, and some insights.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the fun things too, I find with the energy psychology process, is that when you do a process, insights come.
Yes.
Things you'd never thought about.
Yes.
And that's really part of the reason to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember reading in Dr. Fred Gallo's book, he wrote the manuscript, or the textbook, I should say, for energy psychology. And he wrote about this frontal occipital holding. And if I recall correctly, he talks about how, because there is thought to be more energy flow to the prefrontal cortex, i.e. the CEO, that's why the insights come, because this is the most organized and the most refined part of the brain. Not maybe refined is the right word, but certainly maybe most developed.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what separates humans.
Yes.
From salamanders.
Yes. Yeah.
Salamanders have brain stems.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, so we're trying to down tune the salamander brain and tune the CEO.
Yes,
upregulate.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So let's say that somebody, to borrow this, say, skin example, is having a skin issue. So, okay, so they're holding here. And what should they be thinking about or focusing on?
Well, the way that the tapping, the explanation or insights regarding the tapping, is that you're connecting with these meridian pathways. It's a combination of both an exposure therapy combining with an affirmation. So if you're really wanting to, you can do it just for soothing. You can also do it and thinking about something that's troublesome, and then having an affirmation combined with that, something like, well, I deeply and truly accept myself, but that's kind of the components of the energy psychology tapping practices, is to have, or they would say, an activation, have an issue, have some sense of something that's bothersome, and combining that with the resource state of I'm okay.
Right.
And there's many ways to kind of put those words together. But people will ask the question is, what words do I say if I'm going to tap?
Right.
And it's just not, yes, it's words, but it's also emotion.
Yes. Being in a feeling state.
Yes, and in a body.
Yes.
It's an emotional and it's in the physiology. So that's a question we'll often ask is, where do you feel that in your body?
Yes.
And that's an important component of the whole process, again, because it's not just a head thing.
Right, right, exactly. So I'm just going to put together a pretend example here. So if we had somebody who came to you and they were suffering from, say, eczema that was, itchy, red, and painful, and you wanted to give them homework that they could do on their own. So maybe they would hold this or hold this and focus on a feeling state of something like, even though my body is giving me this symptom and I don't really understand why, I have resources. Okay.
And just even that idea of, I don't really understand why, you could use that as part of a journal prompt.
Yes.
And I have this symptom, it might mean this. I have this symptom. You just go back to it and just repeating the issue and allowing the insights to flow. It's like a sentence completion exercise where you've got the same prompt, but you write about it, you write about it, you write about it, write about it, getting to deeper levels of insight.
Okay, so I can imagine that might be something like, something has gotten under my skin.
Exactly.
Yes, it might be my mother.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And here's all the ways that I'm pissed off about that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of how it can go.
Okay.
And the journal writing or expressive writing holds up very well in terms of a therapeutic benefit, and is something that people can easily do and get a lot more comfort and sense of control over their circumstances, because once you write it down and you look at it, it looks different than if it's just floating in your head going around in a circle.
Indeed.
So that's a very good thing.
Absolutely. And that's, quick and easy and practically free.
It is indeed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you'd like our audience to know about somatic psychology or about the relationship between the body and the mind and how symptoms might manifest?
Well, I think it's just important to know that it exists.
Indeed.
I mean, and the somatic psychology and the diagnosis has been established in the diagnostic literature for years. It's just that it's often overlooked.
Yes.
And so that's the thing I would suggest, no matter what your physical symptom is, think about it in the context of your life.
Yes.
And go from there.
Right.
And so you get away from thinking about just as an isolated symptom that needs a physical solution. You're more than that.
Yes.
That's how we leave it. It's more than that.
You are more than that, definitely. And
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. So yes, if you've been injured on, say, your shoulder and your shoulder hurts, that makes sense. So yeah, you might want to do some processing with your journaling about, your feelings about that circumstance. Yeah. Or if it's something symbolic, like you mentioned feet, which, in the energy psychology literature is often about moving forward or about support in the world.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another resource people can go to, this really kind of established this, was Louise Hay's book.
Yes.
About You Can Heal Your Life.
Yes.
It was an early work that really established this and gave people a real resource to go to.
Indeed.
So in terms of other resources, we live in a community with many.
Yes.
And with people with a mind that it allows them to see these interconnections. And so, for people listening to this, I would say seek out resources. And certainly here at the Bamboo Garden Wellness Center,
yes,
there's plenty.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so how can people find you, Dr. Mabbett?
Well, actually, through the Bamboo Garden Wellness Center is the easiest way.
Yes.
I'm on the website with the center, and I can be reached there. And I think that's probably the best way.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was wonderful to have you.
Thank you for having me here today.
Of course.
Okay.